There's no dripping water out of the ceiling and no swinging lights. Good deal. Hot seats here. We tried more and more, but it didn't work. My mic was on. We're in a public meeting now. We, of course, just took a break between applicants. Welcome for you being here. I admire the wiregrass. That's been a good bit of time down there in the outdoors. Beautiful country.
Yeah, I hear you borrowed one of our former superintendents up here.
We did. He can come visit anytime. Dr. Reese did an outstanding job. Got us in a bridge situation where Dr. Murphy fell out of the sky for us and tell him hello. One of our former board members, Stephen Presley, is from Enterprise also. So
Okay.
yeah, they love it. We will conduct this. Ms. Madonna, who's on your far right, did all the work on this, assembled everything that the board has in front of them. So she's going to conduct the process. She'll explain it to you. And you're welcome to speak at any time.
Okay.
Thank
All
you.
right, great. Hi, thanks for being here. We will just open up and ask you to give a short little opening statement or just give us a brief introduction to yourself. Talk about yourself, your background, whatever you want to say. We'll try to keep that under about 5 minutes just so we have time for the questions. Then I will start asking the questions and we'll just move on down the row and flip around one more time and do it again, and then we'll probably be hitting the end of the questions about that point. Feel free to take notes, ask for clarification that you might need at any time. We will then at the end try to leave a few minutes, 5 or 10 minutes to have some follow up, anything you might want to ask us or anything you want to say in closing. That would be great. Okay, so let's start by giving you a chance to introduce yourself.
Great. I really haven't prepared anything, but I'll just tell you a little bit about myself. I was born and raised in Enterprise and got married early in the 90s after I graduated high school, and knew I had to go to school and make something better of myself, so I continued in school and worked at the same time and started raising a family, so work and school sort of went hand in hand, and graduated after several years of going to school at night, weekend, and whatnot. And started with the Examiners of Public Accounts in 1999. And I don't know if you're very familiar with them since they do not audit you guys, but it's basically the state auditors. They audit all the state offices, the governor's office, and they have a county division which audits all of the offices, say, in the courthouse, which includes even your county commissions and county board of educations. So I was in the county division, and so I got familiar with all of the taxes and how they flow and how they're collected, because we had to directly audit all of that. So I did that for 10 years, and then an opening came up at Dale County Schools, which is a neighboring county. It's only about a 20-minute drive or so. So I stayed living in Enterprise and worked there. Was there 3 years, and opening come up at Enterprise, and I've been there since. So I got 20 years experience in this line of work in governmental accounting. It's a very different line of accounting. When I originally went to school for accounting and graduated, wasn't really sure which direction I would head. I got my CPA and thought, like everybody else, just jump in a CPA firm. But they're not the first ones to offer me a job. It was the state, so that's the direction I headed, and I ended up in this line of work. And I'm happy I'm here. It's been a good line of work, and really happy with it.
Great. Okay, we'll start with our questions. So, what do you see as the most important role of the CSFO, and how has your previous experience prepared you to be a successful CSFO for Hoover City Schools?
I've got a cheat sheet here that Amber sent us all, so sounds like you're going to go down that. So I made some notes yesterday when I got it, and I'm not going to go directly off of it, just something to look back at. But when I saw that question, I thought, what's the most important role of the CFO? And, you know, I think it's the same role of anyone in any walk of life. You know, it's the decisions you make, because every decision you make guides the direction you're going to go in. So the most important role is going to be making good decisions and or guiding those who do make decisions in the right direction. I mean, we could go into details of all the different decisions that's made or been made or didn't go the way I wanted or anything like that, but it's always about the decisions to me.
Do you care to go into any detail about some of the decisions that you made or weren't made by the people you were guiding?
Sure, I would do that. There's been a lot of them through the course of my career. There's been some that I've made that I'm proud of and happy, and they'll show on my resume. And there's been some that I'm not so happy I've made. Looking back, I would have still probably made the same decision, understand, but the way it turned out, you know, it's just one of those things you learn from. Such as one of my pet peeves now is trusting vendor salespeople, selling new software systems or you know, anything to do with the school system. You get so many calls, and when you have something you need, you bring some of them in and listen to them. And I've become very skeptical of what they say, and I would rather go out and get proof and find references that would verify everything that's said, because everything that's said is not always what's actual and what they can deliver. So making decisions based on a vendor or a salesperson is one thing I've learned lessons from, and I wish I could go back on, but it's lessons learned.
Mr. Stewart, first of all, I want to thank you for making a long drive from Enterprise to Hoover today, and thank you for submitting your name to this process. Could you describe for me your understanding of the governance and administrative structure of a school system?
Absolutely. Okay, so the governance and structure of a school system. The board sets the policies, policy manual. The board also directly hires superintendent, CSFO, and attorney. The board also hires all employees, but only after a superintendent recommendation. So that's the sort of structure we're talking about. The board also is the one authorized to enter contracts, and of course you can delegate that through policy or action to the superintendent or anyone else. But when the board delegates or hires the superintendent, they expect the superintendent to run the system. And that's the authority I've seen in the systems I've been in. I've been in a lot of them, auditing and, you know, the two I've actually worked with. So the superintendent has the big job of running the day-to-day stuff and staying in contact with the board. And that's a tough job. I get just a little bit of that in my position, you know, being in contact with the board and running my department and such as that. But yeah, I'd say the superintendent's a tough job, but she is the boss of the system, and that includes the CSFO, because she is as the law states it, the supervisor of the CSFO. However, the CSFO has a fiduciary capacity to the board. In other words, if a board member comes to me and wants anything, I'm going to get it for them. And I'm going to tell the superintendent what I'm doing, but I'm going to get what they want if it's just information. Now, if a board member comes to me wanting me to make a decision or do something, then it's going to have to be thought about, talked about, you know, and maybe even passed by, you know, the board, depending on what it is, of course. So that's the way I see the governance and administration in the school system. Was that all of that question?
Yeah, I just want to follow up. In any decisions, you talked about decisions that you made in response to Ms. McDonald's question. Any decisions that you made, do you think the superintendent ought to be involved in the decisions that you make as a CFO?
Absolutely, and I try to not burden the superintendent with low-level decisions, but at the same time, I try to make sure that they're involved in any decisions they might want to be involved in, and that takes getting to know your superintendent, really. And that's been the case every superintendent I've been through. Some just get out there and do it. And you learn that. Now, at first, I'm overcautious because I don't know them. So I come to them with a lot of things. And later, once I learn them, I'll know what they want to decide on and whatnot.
Very good.
Is your board elected?
My
Appointed
board is appointed
by the city
by the
council?
city. And when I was in Dale County, they were elected. So I worked for both.
In your superintendent, elected, employed by the board, elected? I think you just answered that.
Enterprise is currently appointed, just like the board members. Dale County was elected, just like the board members. So I worked for an elected superintendent and an appointed.
Which way do you like the best?
I think it depends on the individual. I think there's more coherence among an appointed or hired superintendent sometimes. I mean, if you ask me what I would pick is best for the system, I would say an appointed superintendent.
We agree. Okay, sorry.
So if you're hired, what do you think would be your biggest challenge your first year in the Hoover City School System?
You skipped some questions.
I'm trying to throw you off.
I
That's
remember
very
that one. I'm gonna find it.
You're being sneaky.
Number 14.
Thank you. I'm going down the line. Biggest challenge. When I first started as a CSFO, well, let me back up when I was an auditor. I'd see all these things that were wrong, that were being done wrong. And in procedures and a lot of times minor things, but could lead to major things. And so I focused on those. I focused on the procedures and the individual problems that I could see on paper that would show up in the financial statements or an audit report. But in doing that, as CSFO, I've learned that that's not always the best way to do things because there's people involved. And people don't like change. And I came in Dale County and I dumped everything upside down and changed things the way I thought it should be. And it runs smooth and it was the right way. But going about it immediately was, I think, a mistake. I think the first thing would be to get to know the people here and to take time to learn them and for them to learn me and to build some trust before jumping in. Now, I will have a list of what I want to change over on the side, as I see things. And just briefly looking at your financials over the last few days, I've seen things I would love to look at. But those things would, I think, sometimes less important than building the trust with the people that's going to be having to do this that you're changing.
This is number 8.
Thank you.
Describe your experience in assisting with and or performing a year-end close, including the preparation of an annual financial statement.
Okay, I can get really boring with that one. But when I was with the examiners, back then when I first started, the boards of education did not do their own financial statements, the county boards. And so the examiners actually did the financial statements. So I've done financial statements for boards of education for 10 years, and I'm talking about actually preparing the financial statements, preparing the GASB 34 statement, everything you see in that audit report that you get from Carr-Riggs and Ingram, I've done for the state, every page of it. So I know it thoroughly. Now, later in later when I was with the examiners, some of my last few years, they started requiring the boards to do their own financial statements. And that's when McAleer actually opened up the opportunity for boards to hire their financial statements to be done by Gary Pitts down at McAleer. Gary Pitts is a former examiner, so he knew how to do the financial statements also. So right now, the typical thing for a board to do is to do their State Department required financial statements, and that's it. And to hire McAleer to do the GASB 34 analysis, or the compiling of those set of financial statements, which they are different than what the State Department requires. So I've got experience all the way up through everything in there. And now there's some things I've probably forgotten because I'm not preparing my own financial statements. I do hire for $2,000 or $2,500 McAleer to do the financial statements. And then the auditors also compile and do the audit report now.
So you don't do your financial statements, sure?
I don't do what you see in the audit report. I do what you see sent to the State Department.
And to the board? Monthly?
And to the board monthly, everything monthly you see, and anything submitted to the State Department. Now, that's not just me, that's across the state. That's actually normal. And then at the end of the year, September 30th, that's when you compile the annual financial statements for the auditors to audit. And that's when you have a lot of different rules and regulations and accounting statements that require you to prepare them differently. And that's I remember when GASB 34 came out back in 2000, 2001. It was a pretty big deal because it changed the financial presentation from a fund accounting in governmental to you have to show it at the fund level, but you also have to show it as a business type financial statement. So you have to show depreciation expense on and expense it and show it on your capital assets. Before, you just had whatever you paid for the capital assets, and that's what was presented on the financial statements. But then you were required to depreciate those assets and show them at actual fair market value. So it's just a different presentation. It's supposed to make things more along the lines of a business type presentation.
I might have interrupted you, but sorry.
No, that's fine.
You don't have to expand too far out, but describe your knowledge and summary of Alabama bid law, which is number 3.
Had extensive dealings with the bid law as an examiner. We audited legal compliance, and that required an extensive knowledge of the bid law and public works law. And we became very familiar. We had many training sessions on that. So just to give you the basics, bid law applies to services and goods purchased that cost over $15,000 in a year, and it includes like items. If you buy a piece of paper, you wouldn't be required to bid it. But if you buy $15,000 worth of paper, you're required to bid it. And if you anticipate to buy that much in a year, you're required to bid it. And if you didn't think you would, and you get to the point you think you are going to go over $15,000, then you're required to bid it at that point. So that's the bid law, and there's some certain exceptions to the bid law. I can't find my number here, but that's fine. Your exceptions to bid law are like professional services, such as legal services, auditing services, architect services, and there are other exceptions for professional services. You're exempt from anything that's not tax, where the money isn't coming from taxes. In other words, if you're say football had its own separate activity, own little set of books at the high school. They didn't get any money from the central office or any kind of tax money. They just got it from gate receipts and fundraisers and whatnot. They don't have to comply with the bid law because they're an exception, because there's no tax money, tax dollars. So the bid law follows tax dollars. There's other exceptions to the bid law. I would have to look back to see exactly what I wrote down, but here it is: insurance, utilities, security. Anything to do with security is exempt from bid law. And if you want to use the state bid or a national purchasing co-op, there's certain regulations that you have to follow, but the state bid you can buy off of pretty much any time. The national purchasing co-ops you can buy off of if the state bid didn't bid it, number one, or if it is higher than the national purchasing co-op would be. And there's certain requirements for the national purchasing co-op. They have to be approved by the examiners of public accounts. So that's basically the bid law. Now, then you have the public works law, which you didn't ask about, but it sort of goes hand in hand and they get confused at times. Public works law applies to buildings, building improvements, lands. So if you hire somebody to replace a roof, well, that's getting a little different. Say you want to build a building that costs $20,000. Well, you only have to comply with the public works law, which requires you to bid anything over $50,000. You don't have to comply with a bid law because a building doesn't fall under the bid law; it falls under the public works law. So, and there are certain requirements of the public works law that's a little more restrictive than the bid law, such as advertising statewide for 4 weeks, I think it is, before accepting bids, and advertising after the project is completed, which contractors are required to. So there's a lot, and usually architects handle the public works law side of things.
You already mentioned public works, but here's a hypothetical question that was mostly in there. I will clarify. In the scenario, hypothetically, the local booster club is offered to rebuild the baseball field at Hoover High School. The booster club's got $100,000 that will pay for this, and then our public works will spend $60,000 to rebuild this field. Now, we have girls softball too, so we'll make sure that's in there. So you've already mentioned public works bid, okay, we're over 50, so you covered that part. What other concerns would you have with taking this private money, doing this project, and abiding by the law, and there's no one concern?
I actually ran into that one time. The boosters, I won't name names, at a system decided they wanted to go out to the ball field and build a concession stand. And so they did, and they didn't notify anybody. Maybe the principal, I think, they notified. They just went out there and built it, with a bunch of volunteers, and they were trying to do the right thing and help the school and all that. But once it, the information of that, or the knowledge of that came up through, and we realized what they had done, it was a problem because they had not gone through the building commission and had not gone through an architect, and there was all kind of things wrong with that thing, and they basically had to tear it down and get an architect to come in there and then get building commission approval and rebuild it. And I don't even know if they actually rebuilt it. So there's all kind of issues related to that. The one thing they didn't have to worry about was the bid law, but or the public works law, if they were doing the work themselves and providing, everything. But that's the main thing is you have to go through the building commission, which normally requires an architect to be able to get it through the building commission.
Can I follow up on that a little bit?
Mm-hmm.
I want you to assume for me, same hypothetical, but I have 4 daughters that play softball. Would that raise any concern for you that we're doing this just for baseball?
What do you mean? You mean just building a building just for baseball because you have daughters that play baseball or softball?
That's right.
So you're saying, would I have a problem thinking there was some favoritism?
Mm-hmm.
You run into that all the time in politics. What I've seen though is most board members try to do the right thing, and sure they'll question stuff that relates to them, because that's what they see. or if someone in the public brings it to them, you know, and it's to do with finances, I usually am gonna hear about it and have to answer, you know, why is this being done that way, or can it be done a different way? Recently, a board member came to me with an issue that did relate to him, and wanted information, and it was a lengthy process getting all the information together for him, and it took months to get it together, and I asked for his patience in it, but you know, sometimes they just want to know why, and sometimes it takes a while to answer why. But if the board agrees to it, then I'm going to do it. Yeah, so that's you know the end of that question. Okay.
May I just go a little bit further? Any concerns about Title IX?
I don't deal in Title IX usually. That's usually on, you know, more of the instructional human resources type side of things. So I haven't had a lot of experience doing it.
Thank you.
Oh, is it me? Sorry.
No,
Passing the
break's
baton.
good.
Sorry.
Yeah, take your time.
The position for which you've applied is one where you'll represent Hoover City Schools. And as a representative of our school district, there are lots of occasions for you to interface with the public, the board, in a public meeting, with community leaders, business leaders, parent groups, community groups. And so I want you to talk to us about the experiences that you've had doing that, and good or bad, how those experiences have gone for you.
Yeah. When I saw that question, I had to think about that a long time. You know, just to number one, understand what you're asking. Every situation is different. Every person is different, and you have to deal with. It's kind of like managing people. Every person is different. You don't manage just one management style. You manage the individuals, and you know, some individuals need praise and a lot of it, and some you just leave alone and let them do their job, and some you have to kick in the butt. But it's the same with people dealing with anything. You know, the things I wrote down were learn to listen more and talk less. Some people just want to be heard, especially angry employees or angry parents. I got a phone call. We hire a company called Next Check to collect our bounce checks, bad checks, and you know, once a check's rejected, it goes straight to them. We don't deal with it. They try to collect on it, and they do that through phone calls. And apparently they called this one parent and were kind of aggressive with it. And I got a call from that parent, and he was so angry, just furious, and because he's a good person and does his finances well, and you know this was a mistake that happened like this and all this. So I just sat there and listened, because it's easy to get caught up in that and you know let that anger affect you, if that makes sense. But the best thing to do is just sit back and wait till they get it out. So you asked how I deal with members of public, board, superintendent, it's all the same. You try and listen, and you try and give them what they need. And if that's to vent, then that's what you need to do, and you should do. So by the end of the conversation, me and this parent were getting along fine. I agreed with him. Yeah, it's not right and all this, but this is the situation we have, and he understood it. And you know, that situation went away. And sometimes that's all it takes. Now, as far as out in the public, of course, you have to present yourself a little differently because the public and media expects more from the leaders of a school system than just anybody else, and I've learned that. And we should all, you know, want better for ourselves, and you know, try to be better ourselves. I don't know if that exactly answered your question. question. That's the way I see dealing with people in general.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think we should all learn to listen more and talk less.
Yeah.
So I'm a data analyst, so I have a lot of data experience, and I just would be interested in what type of analysis you would perform to determine the financial health or condition of the school system.
Number
Number 9, sorry. We're jumping around.
Yeah, well, it's what I did when I, first was told that I would be interviewing, is I pulled your financial statements. The first thing I looked at was debt. I won't give you my analysis unless you ask for it, but,
I'd like to know.
okay. I'm a pretty direct person. If you learn me, you'll know I speak direct and straight, so just know that. Your debt's a little high for my taste, but and I've seen where you issued debt, like in 2017, 15 million in debt. Well, that was a refunding, wasn't it? My question would be, were those bonds callable? And if they were callable and you have 160 million in cash, why aren't you paying them off?
Good questions. That was thoroughly vetted, and those are good questions.
And yeah, and other things related to debt. I mean, the current debt you have, how much of that is callable? I know that you only get one shot at refinance, but once it becomes callable, you can just pay it off. So you've got a lot of cash. And the other thing was I saw a lot of cash and not as much in investments. And my first question when I walked in if I walk in the door is going to be, how's this all this cash invested?
Yeah.
What kind of return are we getting?
Treasury bond.
Well, that's your investments, but you have a lot of cash.
The
also.
cash.
Is that in a money market or?
It's
Interest
obviously
bearing.
highly regulated secure funds, but Ms. Hancock, when she first came on board, we looked at that, and I guess I mentioned it correct. The rate of return, we looked at very closely. A lot of banks won't take that kind of cash because of the regulations.
They won't. A lot of banks, local banks will not. I've had to dig all over Alabama to find banks that will take it in their regular CDs. And what I did tap into was brokered CDs, and those are something that you can't exactly cash in. We could, but you have to go to market and sell them if you cashed in early. But that's always an option to see what's out there as far as making money on that, because that's just a lot of cash to be sitting there.
It's a very good question, and you'd have to go back to why that much money's there, and it's got to do with a tax that was levied by the county commission back in 2017. So it's the story behind it. We haven't just been taking an overage and building a cash out there, but good observation.
Yeah, and I noticed that it was in general fund rather than construction fund, and I mean, that tells me it's not designated for construction, but it looks like you're running a lot of construction through your general fund. And my question, my thoughts would be, let's move some of it over to a construction fund. That way the general fund can show what it really looks like, rather than mixing in construction. So that would just help clean up the financials and be able to look at the face of them and tell what's going on a little better. So the debt thing, a way to reduce it. I mean, I don't think, with the size system and budget that you have, that you're way out of whack on your debt. I don't. I'd have to do some ratios and run. I just like zero debt. So
Yeah,
that's the way I always go about things. If I'm presented with something, I'm going to find an alternative if possible to keep from getting debt. So that's one thing I look at, the number of personnel you have. That's the next biggest thing as far as costing. And since you want my analysis, you have 220 something local units. Are you familiar with what I'm talking about? That's a lot, but if you can afford them, there's no better way to educate children than have more people in the classroom knowing what they're doing teaching the kids. So I understand that. So there's a balance there, but I still had a lot of local units. And there's some of your schools that look odd as far as the number of local units. At a middle school is 24, but at another one is 0. So that's just things I'm seeing that I would, ask and, want answers to as far as what causes this and the reasons for that. And I'm sure it's all legitimate, it's just stuff that comes to mind when I'm looking over stuff.
From taking a snapshot from your side, it would be hard to.
Yeah, you can't tell. I'm just looking at what was out there
Yep.
on the State Department website.
Mhm.
And I'm not criticizing at
I
all.
understand.
Don't get me
I'm taking
wrong.
it away.
I'm just saying these are things that I would ask.
What do you want to hear?
The condition of your capital assets. That would be something I would look at to tell the financial health. Are your capital assets deteriorating, or are they nearly new, or we're talking about your buildings. And I don't know, honestly. I did see you had 300 and something, 335 or something million in capital assets, but that's the fund level, which didn't show in depreciation, and I didn't look at the one that showed depreciation. But anyway, that's something I'll look at. And your tax structure, what are you bringing in as far as taxes, and what is the city giving the schools?
5 million.
So they're just giving.
Out of their
5
general
million.
fund, they're giving us 5 million. Obviously, we're at 72.6 mils collection here now, so obviously the residents of the city contribute to that loans, but the city government itself gives us 5 million annually. And they fund all our SROs, which is what we're for. So our city's very generous.
That is great. That is great. That is really good. You don't see that everywhere. So yeah, that's good. But also, as far as the taxes is flowing through from the city and what's designated for the school system, I would look at that to see how many meals you're getting, how much of the sales tax you're getting, and what the sales tax rate is, and things like that. And all that would give you a big picture of the overall financial structure of this school system. And just being around Alabama and Alabama systems all these years, I know Hoover's in good shape and they're a good school system. Everybody knows that in the state. So that's no secret, but I'm just giving you an example of things I would look at for any school system.
That's very helpful, yeah.
Mr. Chairman,
Jump over to you.
Go ahead.
yeah, because this is part of what we were talking about, I'm getting out of order, but with permission. In the state funding, we just talked about Avalon city funding. Obviously, Avalon's collected in arrears. We've got some districts we know are losing students. They may be losing business, tax base, whatever. In our case, thank goodness we're continuing to develop. The city is where we're going from current use into commercial use, so we should see going forward. How are you going to work with budgets that obviously fluctuate, which really is a 2-year plan if you're going to get taxes in arrears, but yet you've still got to look out forward to see the Board of Equalization comes up in the summer. Are you good about understanding all those fluctuations for what you just said? Because we've got almost 75 mills here, so we've got more local funding than we do state funding, which is unusual.
That will answer some other questions, but yeah. I mean, you're asking me how I budget or how I
Are
would
you
see
fluent
that?
with understanding, the tax flows mainly from Avalon tax collections, because that's the variable, whether it be the assessments or whether it be the value of the property.
Yeah, well, I audited, tax collectors, tax assessors, and the revenue commissioners, probate judges, all that. So I know how the taxes flow, where they come from, the time periods, the assessment period that ends and then it's collected and all of that in advance. The thing that's hardest about budgeting to me, 80% of most school systems is personnel. That's where your expenses go. So that's going to be your big issues as far as where your money goes. But the state is a year behind in their child count and funding for you. So the funding we're about to get starting October 1 this year was based on the child count that was performed last September, the first 20 days after Labor Day. So your numbers this year are going to look a whole lot different, maybe, than the prior year. So you're having to look at your immediate needs as far as how many teachers you're gonna need this coming year based on your projected student count for this coming year. But then you have to place funds that were calculated based on prior year numbers. And that's probably one of the most difficult things.
And that's really my question, whether it be the ADM and the calculation, if you're spending money on kids and you in the district now that you're not gonna get paid for, or whether it be tax collections, which are done in arrears, assuming they go up, so, yeah. That's the answer.
Yeah, that is a difficult situation. The best thing you can do, and what I tell my personnel people that are, you know, going through the hiring process and all for the coming year, is staff for what you need. Staff, you know, yes, you have to look at what you're being funded for, because there's certain restrictions. You know, if it's Title I school, you have to place all your state-earned units and things like that. But beyond, you know, look at those. But beyond that, you got to staff for what you need. And if you don't need that many, then let's look at a way to move those units to another school. Or if you need way more, you know, teachers, then, you know, let's look at doing that too. And it depends on the system and the flexibility you have financially. You know, at Enterprise, we're fairly flexible. We could afford to pay a teacher here and there out of
Yeah, you have some large funds,
yeah.
I promise this will be the end of me, because I keep asking, they're all tied together. Are you Title I district, you're right at the formula?
Our whole district is not Title I, but we do have Title I schools at most of the
So
schools.
you have Title I schools, you don't use targeted funds, you have Title
No, we
I
don't use targeted assistance. We do just per school,
So you designate it, which,
school wide.
we use targeted, funding, I think that's what we're for here. No, we're not, obviously, we're not to the rate yet to be a district, but we don't have any Title I schools either, we're using the target funding, so that would, kind of was going to be my last question.
That does make it a lot more flexible when it comes to personnel and
Some limitations, of course, on who can actually take advantage of within the schools, but our staff does a great job of following federal law.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, it's my turn? You kind of touched on this, so I want you to continue to develop your response. I'm going to question number 7.
okay.
Describe your experience in developing, implementing, and evaluating a school system's budget and ongoing fiscal management. And if you could, provide some concrete examples and the size budgets with which you have experience.
Okay. This is one I didn't make any notes on because it's such a big subject. I'm just going to have to go based on what I've done in the past and walk you through it. The budgeting process is one of the most lengthy things I do, and it's probably the hardest job of any CSFO. It's a long process, and it's too many unknowns, and to accountants, we don't like unknowns. We like 2 + 2 = 4. So you've got a lot of projections in there you have to assume, and you know, if I project a 2% sales tax increase in the coming year, and a board member during the budget hearings asked me, where did you get this 2% number? I'm going to have to say I had to guess based on prior year, you know, increases. It's hard to do. We're not, you know, economists, and we don't predict the economy. We can look at someone who does, but we don't. So it's the most difficult process. But the way we do it, and the way I found that I like to do it the most, is number one, we have departments within our general fund. A lot of school systems have a general fund that everybody spends out of, like maintenance, and you know, you got instructional departments, and everybody spending out of the one pot. And we have taken and separated the general fund into numerous pots. So basically, every director that's in charge of a program would have a different department budget, such as maintenance and technology will have their own budget, and you know, instructional, you know, secondary instructional have their own budget, and elementary instruction. So we've got all of these different budgets, and I like it like that because there's someone in charge of that budget. And I found that if you just have one big pot that everybody spends out of, people don't pay attention to it. But if you put them in charge of a set of funds, they're going to pay attention to it. You know, if you know, especially as directors. So it works well like that as far as going through the year and keeping up with their budgets and staying on targets. I now have a maintenance director that comes to me and says, I'm so-and-so percent under budget, can I go ahead and do this and do that? You know? So they're really proud of keeping up with that. So I try to develop the budget based on their needs. I have them bring to me what they want, and then make my projections of revenues based on what the state puts out, of course, and projections of local revenues and whatnot. Then bring in everything that they ask for, their total numbers, and if it fits, then I go to the superintendent and say, you know, hey, everything works out, and this is what we look like as far as all our department budgets. If it don't fit, then I still go to the superintendent and say, this is what we look like. You know, what do you want to do? And I've had, you know, superintendents go back and say, everybody got to cut so-and-so, whatnot. So you try to develop those budgets like that. There's a lot of little nuances as far as everything you've got to do in a budget, but it's the overall process is fairly simple. Project your revenue, and you know, put in your expenses that you're projecting, and see how you come out. You know, state funding, federal funding, all that has a lot to do with it. We have 30-something different sets of funds, and you have to budget each of those sets of funds. But you know, general fund's the big one, and that's how what most people look at. And so that's where our departments come in. But I work with each department individually, department head, on their budgets. I'm usually the one inputting the budgets. So I've been at every different level, from a very small system to now a medium-sized system. So I've done it all from, you know, the lowest. I was the only one doing any book work at Dale County, and so I did all the, you know, budgeting and all the journal entries and bank reconciliations and you name it. You know, work way up, but it's a big process, and you know, I'm always welcome to suggestions as far as different ways to do it because of that. So.
Thank you.
12 and 13, throwing you another loop.
Thank you.
Two-part. How would you deal with a disagreement with the superintendent, and then how would you deal with conflicting requests for instructions from maybe the board and the superintendent?
Okay, disagreements with the superintendent. I've had a few over the years, and they're all respectful. You know, I'm pretty good at keeping my emotions in check, and I would have to say that during each of those disagreements, I was pretty good at that. There's a certain point at which you have to say, you know, they're the boss, they're the one responsible. Here's my suggestion, even though I know it's right in the best way, you're the one that's got to answer for it. So, you know, you got to do what you got to do. In that case, I hope that it don't come to that. I hope that when I bring a superintendent information or requests or whatever, that they take it in a way that is meant to be helping them, and that's a tough one though. It is, because you have a fiduciary capacity, you know, responsibility to the board, but at the same time your supervisor's the superintendent's your supervisor. So it's a tough spot, and you know, the first time I read that law before I was a CSFO and saw that, I was like, that could cause problems. You know? And luckily, I haven't been in any that couldn't be resolved, I don't believe. But it's always a tough situation that you have to deal with carefully. Okay, your next question about conflicting requests. Well, I can tell you what I do with this situation. I am open with everyone, always. I'm not gonna hide anything from anyone. So if a board member comes to me with a request or whatever, I'm not gonna like go out to the public with it, but I'm not gonna hide it from the superintendent. And the same if the superintendent comes to me with something, you know, I don't go to the board with everything. I'm not saying that. I'm saying if it's something that I believe the board might have issues with or might want to know, you know, and I would tell you if I was going to. I'm not gonna just go around behind anybody's back and do anything. I can tell you that. Everybody's gonna know everything. So that's how I deal with any kind of conflicting request, is get each party's opinion on it and how they would like to handle it. And hopefully we can come to a resolution without being conflicting. However, like a certain situation I was in recently, a board member requested something, I went to the superintendent, and well, I'm not gonna say this out in public, but there was some conflicting requests. And I let the superintendent know, I'm gonna do what the board member wants. This is just information they're wanting, I'm gonna get the information for them and give it to them, and, you know, you guys can fight it out after that. So, that's what I would do.
We have 3 strong finalists for this position with differing credentials and experience. Why should we select you?
You know, when I interview people, I ask this question just to see their response. You know, there's no good response because you don't know the other candidates. They don't know the other candidates, you know. But I'm always interested to see how they respond. So, not going to fall into that trap, but because that's for you to judge. But I will tell you, you know, I have a proven track record of results, as you've seen in my list of accomplishments. I have 20 years experience in every facet of governmental accounting in the state of Alabama. You know, say the state level, but everything leading up to a Board of Education, with my examiner experience and CFO in a small system where I do everything, and now in a larger system where I supervise things being done. And I don't know, it just seems like Hoover's a good step, you know. Dale County was around 3,000 kids, and Enterprise around 7,000, so that's about twice the size. And Hoover's about twice the size of Enterprise, so it just seemed like a logical step, to be honest with you.
So that's your primary reason for wanting to move to Hoover and leave Enterprise? It's just a good stepping stone?
Well, I
For
wouldn't
you.
call it a stepping stone. It would be a good and logical step, and I feel like it's time for a change. You know, sometimes in life you just get there, and it just works out like it's supposed to either way.
I think I've used all my questions.
You're
So.
done, yeah.
No more questions?
No, really,
We're done.
if anyone has any additional.
I had an additional question. You would be coming to Hoover from Dale County. Can you give us some insight as to how you would build rapport with this board and with central office here? Board superintendent and the other employees that you'll be working with in the building.
Well, number one, went from Dale County to Enterprise, and then from Enterprise maybe to here.
Sorry.
But yeah, to build rapport is, I don't know, a complicated way of saying get to know people. And you don't get to know people unless you talk to them and meet them and are around them some. So I think that's what it would take, is just some time, you know, to get to know people and them to get to know me. Did that answer your question? I missed part of it?
No.
Okay. That's all our questions. Then we'll give you a few minutes to kind of see if there's any questions you have for us or anything else you want to say to kind of close us out.
I don't know. I think I've probably talked enough. You all have my phone numbers. My phone number. And you're welcome to call me and ask any questions you like, from this point forward. So beyond that, thank you for this opportunity to come here. I know Hoover's a great system. I know, a few of the people, like Andy Craig, I've met him and been around him a little bit. And he's a real high-class individual, so have high hopes. So thank you.
You're certainly very qualified. I mean, what the board will do, we'll have a call meeting sometime next week. The board, obviously, this is a public interview, so the board will collect their thoughts individually, then we will convene a meeting at some point next week, and hopefully we come up with a nomination and get the votes to hire the CSFO. But we will let you know where we are in that process. And thank you again so much. It's flattering for us that you came here. I admire that I did take the time in detail to look at what you accomplished and so on. You very accomplished. So,
Well, thank you. Those are the things I jumped in and started doing, and I did over my course of the time as a board. But like I said, sometimes you need to sit back and wait, so they'll go over a little better. But thank you.
thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good.
All right.